Барлықтарына сәлем, біз сіздермен өткен шақты жалғастырайық. Бүгінгі сақта біз болмады, болмадық дегенді өтеміз. Мынау бізде болмадым, болмады. Мынау бізде болмадық және болмады. Ол бізде wasn't, weren't болып табылады. Бұрында болмады, болмадық деп. Wasn't бізде жекешемен қолданылады, weren't бізде көпшемен қолданылады. Осындай қарапайым ереже. Бұл қате болмады. It болғандықтан кейін wasn't қате, a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Ола кедей балалар болмады. They болмады. Weren't poor балалар, children. They weren't poor children. Кедей дегеніміз осы poor дегенді білдіреді. Мен анау жақта қыста болмадым. I wasn't there қыста in the winter. I wasn't there in the winter. Бұл жеңіл болмады. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Бұл жеңіл болмады. Мен банкте болмадым. I wasn't in the bank. I wasn't in the bank. I wasn't in the bank. Бұл арзан болмады. It wasn't cheap. It wasn't cheap. Ол кәсіпкер болмады. He wasn't businessman. He wasn't businessman. He wasn't businessman. Бұл арзан болмады. Қайттан ба? Бұлай істейік. Бұл қымбат болмады. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't expensive. Бұл дұрыс болмады. It wasn't дұрыс correct. It wasn't correct. It wasn't correct. Бұл менің сөмкемде болмады. It wasn't in менің сөмкемде my bag. It wasn't in my bag. It wasn't in my bag. Мен жалғыз болмадым. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. Мен жалғыз болмадым. I wasn't alone. Оныкі дұрыс болмады. She wasn't right. She wasn't right. Оныкі дұрыс болмады. She wasn't right. Бұл қате болмады. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Ол бос емес болмады. She wasn't бос емес busy. She wasn't busy. She wasn't busy. Бұл қымбат болмады. It wasn't қымбат. Expensive. It wasn't expensive. Бұл жақын болмады. It wasn't close. It wasn't close. Бұл жеткілікті болмады. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. Олар аш болмады. They weren't hungry. They weren't hungry. Бұл алыс болмады. It wasn't far. It wasn't far. It wasn't far. Ол алдыңғы жылы Англияда болмады. She wasn't in England алдыңғы жылы last year. She wasn't in England last year. Ол жалғыз болмады. He wasn't alone. He wasn't alone. Бұл менің жоспарымда болмады. It wasn't in my plan. It wasn't in my plan. It wasn't in my plans. It wasn't in my plans. Ол дені сау болмады. She wasn't дені сау healthy. She wasn't healthy. Go shorty. Бұл эффективті болмады. It wasn't effective. It wasn't effective. It wasn't effective. Ол жалқау болмады. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't lazy. Бұл біз үшін қиын болды. It was difficult position for us. It was difficult for us. It was difficult for us. Бұл қызықты болмады. It wasn't interesting. It wasn't interesting. Ол дүкенде болмады. He wasn't дүкенде in the shop. He wasn't in the shop. He wasn't in the shop. Сен ана жақта болмадың. You weren't ана жақта. There. You weren't there. Олар бақытты болмады. They weren't happy. They weren't happy. Бұл пайдалы болмады. It wasn't пайдалы. Useful. It wasn't useful. It wasn't useful. Бұл тегін болмады. It wasn't free. It wasn't free. It wasn't free. Ол дәрге болмады. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a doctor. Ол еңбекқор болмады. He wasn't hard working. He wasn't hard working. Мен үйде болмадым. I wasn't at home. I wasn't at home. I wasn't at home. Ол кеше бос емес болды. He was бос емес busy кеше. Yesterday. She was busy yesterday. She was busy yesterday. Олар бай болмады. They weren't by rich. They weren't rich. Бұл менің ойым болмады. It wasn't my idea. It wasn't my idea. It wasn't my idea. Олар бірге болмады. They weren't бірге. Together. They weren't together. They weren't together. Бұл мен үшін қызықты болмады. It wasn't interesting мен үшін for me. It wasn't interesting for me. It wasn't interesting for me. Олар бізбен болмады. They weren't бізбен with us. They weren't with us. Бұл маңызды болмады. It wasn't important. It wasn't important. Ол кедей болмады. She wasn't poor. She wasn't poor. Бұл сөмкеде болмады. It wasn't сөмкеде in the bag. It wasn't in the bag. It wasn't in the bag. Так, мен ана жақта қыста болмадым. I wasn't there қыста in the winter. I wasn't there in the winter. Олар зоопаркте болмады. They weren't in the zoo. They weren't in the zoo. Бұл қорапта болмады. It wasn't in the box. It wasn't in the box. Осы жағдайда болмады. She wasn't осы жағда in this situation. She wasn't in this situation. Мен осыған дайын болмадым. I wasn't ready осыған for it. For this. I wasn't ready for it. Біз алдыңғы көктемде анау жақта болдық. We болдық. Were ана жақта. There алдыңғы көктемде. Last spring. We were there last spring. Олар ашулы болмады. They weren't angry. They weren't angry. Бұл тым қымбат болмады. It wasn't too expensive. It wasn't too expensive. Бұл ең керемет таңдау болмады. It wasn't ең керемет таңдау. The best choice. It wasn't the best choice. Бұл мүмкін болмады. It wasn't possible. Мүмкін дегеніміз possible дегенді біледі. Бұл мүмкін болмады. It wasn't possible. Ол бақшада болмады. He wasn't бақшада in the garden. He wasn't in the garden. Бұл менің қалтамда болмады. It wasn't in my pocket. It wasn't in my pocket. Мен ойымша бұл сондай маңызды болмады. I think it wasn't сондай маңызды so important. I think it wasn't so important. Бұл оның ең керемет жетістігі болмады. It wasn't his best result. It It wasn't his best result. Бұл менің үстелімде болмады. It wasn't on my table. It wasn't on my table. Үстінде бұл on. Сен столдың үстінде ғой. It wasn't on my table. Бұл менің партамда болды. It was партаның үстінде. On менің my парта desk. It was on my desk. Desk деп нені айтады? Парта айтады және жазатын столды айтады. Соны да desk дейді. Ал table ол көбіне тамақ ішетін, зат қоятын бір стол. Біз анау жақта болмадық. Бұл анау жақта болмады. Дұрыс. It wasn't ана жақта there. It wasn't there. Мен түсіндім, бұл сондай арзан болмады. I understood it wasn't so cheap. I understood it wasn't so cheap. Understood бұл өткен шағы. I understood it wasn't so cheap. Ол түсінді, бұл арзан болды. She understood it was cheap. She understood it was cheap. Мен түсінбедім, бұл арзан болған. I didn't understand it was cheap. I didn't understand it was cheap. Олар үйленбеген болды. They weren't married. They weren't married. Біз үйленбеген болдық. We weren't married. We weren't married. Мен білем, бұл тегін болмады. I know it wasn't free. I know it wasn't free. Ол біледі, бұл тегін болды. She knows it was free. She knows it was free. Мен білем, бұл қымбат болмады. I know it wasn't expensive. I know it wasn't expensive. Мен шынымен аш болдым. I was really hungry. I was really hungry. Ол кеше аш болмады. She wasn't hungry yesterday. She wasn't hungry yesterday. Мен ойымша бұл мен үшін пайдалы болмады. I think it wasn't helpful for me. I think it wasn't helpful for me. Мен ойымша бұл ол үшін пайдалы болмады. I think it wasn't helpful ол үшін for her. I think it wasn't helpful for her. Оның ойынша бұл пайдалы болды. She thinks it was useful. She thinks it was useful. Мен ойымша бұл мен үшін пайдалы болмады. I think it was пайдалы болмады. It wasn't useful мен үшін for me. I think it wasn't useful for me. Мен ойымша бұл оған пайдалы болмады. I think it wasn't useful for him. I think it wasn't useful for him. Ол ойлайды, бұл өте пайдалы болды. She thinks it was very useful. She thinks it was very useful. Ол осы тестке дайын болмады. She wasn't ready осы тест үшін for this test. She wasn't ready for this test. Ол емтиханға дайын болмады. He wasn't ready for an exam. She wasn't ready for an exam. Мен осы жағдайға дайын болмадым. I wasn't ready for this situation. I wasn't ready for this situation. Мен ойымша бұл ең келме жауап болмады. I think it wasn't the best answer. I think it wasn't the best answer. Оның ойынша бұл жақсы болмады. He thinks it wasn't good. He thinks it wasn't good. Мен ойымша бұл ең керемет ой болды. I think it was, ең керемет ой, the best idea. I think it was the best idea. Бұл ең керемет жауап болмады. It wasn't the best answer. It wasn't the best answer. Ол ең керемет әнші болды. He was the best singer. He was the best singer. Ол ең керемет биші болмады. She wasn't the best dancer. She wasn't the best dancer. Олар ашылы болмады. They weren't angry. They weren't angry. Мен аш болмадым. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't hungry. Біз бақытты болмадық. We weren't happy. We weren't happy. Мен білдім, бұл мүмкін болмады. I knew it wasn't possible. I knew it wasn't possible. Бұл қағазда болмады. It wasn't on the paper. It wasn't on the paper. Бұл сөмкеде болды. It was in the bag. It was in the bag. Бұл бізге қымбат болмады. It wasn't expensive for us. It wasn't expensive for us. Мен осы емтиханға дайын болмадым. I wasn't ready for this exam. I wasn't ready for this exam. Меніңше бұл ең керемет ой болмады. I think it wasn't the best idea. I think it wasn't the best idea. Мен саяхта болмадым. I wasn't in the park. I wasn't in the park. Бұл үстелде болмады. It wasn't on the table. It wasn't on the table. Меніңше бұл оған қызықты болмады. I think it wasn't interesting for him. I think it wasn't interesting for him. Бұл жазда болды. It was in the summer. It was in the summer. Бұл бізге қызықты болмады. It wasn't interesting for us. It wasn't interesting for us. Мен көрдім, бұл жеңіл болмады. I saw it wasn't easy. I saw it wasn't easy. Бұл мен үшін қиындық болмады. It wasn't, қиындықты былай істейік, a problem for me. It wasn't a problem for me. Бұл күзде болды. It was күзде, in the autumn. It was in the autumn. Так. It was in the autumn. Менің ойымша олардікі дұрыс болмады. I think they weren't right. I think they weren't right. Міне осылай, бұл бізде wasn't, weren't-ке мысалдар болды. Қалай қолдану керектігін сұрақтар болса комментарийда жазамыз, және келесі сабақта кездескенше.